Political comeback thanks to and at the expense of President Trump. Canada's Liberal Party, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, declared victory overnight despite being really left for dead several months ago. But then Donald Trump took office, targeted Canada with tariffs, and threatened to annex it as the 51st state.
For years, Canada has played the part of the diplomatic neighbor, calm, predictable, and loyal to its trade agreements with the United States. But that image is cracking. Following one of the most charged elections in Canadian history, Mark Carney's rise to power marks a dramatic shift. His victory, backed by a surge of anti-Trump sentiment, is not just a win for Canada's Liberal Party. It's a signal that the country is no longer willing to quietly absorb the economic shockwaves from Washington. Carney didn't just run a campaign, he ran a resistance movement. Throughout his campaign, he delivered a single message: Canada will not bow to President Trump's trade tactics. His pledge to stand firm against U.S. tariffs turned into a national rallying cry, galvanizing a voter base frustrated with what many now view as an economic assault by their southern neighbor. The message hit home. Carney's win was powered by voters in industrial towns hit hard by tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos, sectors long integrated with the U.S. economy but increasingly targeted by Trump's aggressive trade policies. The stakes couldn't be higher. At the center of the tension is a $30 billion retaliatory tariff package already in place, a direct response to Trump's sweeping tariffs on Canadian imports. But that figure might only be the beginning. Carney has made it clear that if Washington doesn't back down, Canada is ready to escalate. Phase 2, $60 billion. Phase 3, a jaw-dropping $110 billion in tariffs. For a country with just under 40 million people, that's not just tough talk. That's an economic declaration of war. Carney's plan is both tactical and symbolic. He's announced a $2 billion strategic response fund for the auto sector. He's vowed to inject billions more into Canada's supply chains, critical minerals, energy infrastructure, and alternative trade routes. At the same time, he's reallocating tariff revenue to directly support workers impacted by the U.S. measures. This isn't just economic retaliation, it's a full-scale economic reorientation. Under Carney, Canada is making it clear. The United States may still be its biggest trade partner, but it won't be its only one. That shift is already underway. A $5 billion investment has been earmarked for expanding trade partnerships beyond U.S. borders. The EU, Asia-Pacific countries, and even Africa are on the radar. Carney has said publicly that Canada's overwhelming reliance on the U.S., accounting for 70% of its exports, must be reduced. His goal is to bring that number down to 50 to 55% over the next decade. The logic is simple. If the U.S. is going to use trade as a weapon, Canada has to build armor, and that means diversifying where it sends its goods. The emotional weight behind Carney's win can't be ignored either. His campaign tapped into something deeper than economic frustration. It tapped into national pride. For decades, Canadians have tolerated trade friction with Washington, believing diplomacy would ultimately prevail. But when the Trump administration began slapping tariffs on essential Canadian goods, while publicly questioning the value of the U.S.-Canada alliance, the tone shifted. Carney captured that shift. His slogan, "We will not bow," struck a chord with manufacturers, truckers, refinery workers, and small business owners who felt abandoned by the old strategy of quiet cooperation. Even international observers are acknowledging the symbolism of the moment. Canada, long seen as the calm sibling in North American politics, is showing its teeth. The phrase "angry and overwhelming" has emerged as a political slogan. A once diplomatic country is now choosing confrontation, and it's not without justification. Canada's steel and aluminum industries have been battered by Trump's 25% tariffs. Auto manufacturers, closely linked with American production lines, are warning of massive disruptions. The U.S. market has become more unpredictable, and for Canadian producers, that unpredictability now feels like a threat. Carney's team isn't waiting around to see how bad it can get. The proposed tariffs, $60 billion in the next round, $110 billion if needed, aren't just retaliatory. They're bargaining chips. The goal is to force Washington back to the negotiating table under new terms, with Canada sitting as an equal, not a subordinate. For the U.S., the implications are serious. Canada is its largest supplier of energy, natural gas, electricity, and heavy crude oil. These are not commodities easily replaced. American refiners rely heavily on Canadian heavy crude, particularly in the Midwest, where facilities are designed specifically for it. Shifting away would mean high retooling costs or greater reliance on less stable regions like Venezuela or the Middle East. Energy integration isn't the only concern. U.S. consumers could also feel the pinch. If tariffs continue to escalate, Prices on Canadian goods, automobiles, aluminum, even food could rise in the U.S. market. That could fuel domestic inflation and political backlash, especially in states economically tied to cross-border trade. Some U.S. analysts are urging Trump to de-escalate before the damage becomes permanent. But if Carney's tone is any indication, Canada isn't bluffing. Unlike previous leaders, he's not seeking to soothe Washington's concerns. He's here to defend Canadian interests, and he's willing to endure economic pain to do it. Share the pain is how Carney described the strategy. If the U.S. insists on tariffs, Canada will impose its own, and make sure the burden is mutual. Whether this ends in compromise or collapse is still unclear. Trump has so far shown no indication that he plans to soften his stance. His message has been consistent: America first. If Carney wants to talk, he's welcome to come to the table. But don't expect concessions. And that's where Part 1 leaves us. Two neighboring countries, tied together by history and trade, now stand on the edge of economic rupture. One side led by a president who sees tariffs as leverage, the other by a prime minister ready to strike back harder than ever before. What comes next could reshape North American trade for decades. Mark Carney's government isn't just preparing to retaliate against Trump's tariffs, it's redrawing Canada's entire trade map. And at the heart of that shift is a powerful question. What happens if Canada decides the U.S. is no longer its most important customer? The early answer is this: diversification. Carney's administration has already pledged $5 billion toward securing new trade partners. And it's not just talk. Concrete steps are underway to expand deals with the European Union, deepen relationships in Asia, and explore emerging markets in Africa and the Middle East. For Canada, this is a bold pivot, away from decades of economic dependence on the United States toward a new era of self-determination. But trade realignment isn't just about ideology, it's about survival, and nowhere is that clearer than in the energy sector. Energy is the quiet engine behind the US-Canada relationship. For years, Canadian oil, natural gas, and electricity have powered American homes, factories, and data centers. The infrastructure is deeply intertwined. Pipelines cross the border like veins, transmitting billions of dollars worth of fuel every year. In fact, Canada supplies more than half of all U.S. oil imports, a fact that gives Ottawa considerable leverage. And now, that leverage is being tested. Trump's announcement of a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, including a 10% tariff on Canadian energy, has shaken one of the world's closest energy relationships. Canadian officials, surprised by the move, now see diversification not just as a policy option, but as an economic necessity. This has opened the door for massive investment in export capacity. The expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline is just one example. With that project nearly tripling Canada's ability to ship oil to the Pacific coast, the country is now in a stronger position to supply Asian markets, particularly energy-hungry allies like South Korea and Japan. Liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is another critical focus. 6 West Coast LNG terminals are currently under construction or in planning phases, with the first phase of LNG Canada set to go online this year. Once operational, these terminals could allow Canada to export more than 6 billion cubic feet of gas per day, placing it among the top 5 global LNG exporters. That kind of capacity doesn't just boost Canada's trade profile, it gives Ottawa options. The U.S. is watching all this with growing concern. For all its oil wealth, America still relies heavily on Canadian imports, especially heavy crude, which many U.S. refineries are optimized to process. If those supplies shift elsewhere, American refiners could face higher costs, limited options, and exposure to more volatile suppliers. Countries like Venezuela or Saudi Arabia could fill the gap, but at a geopolitical cost the U.S. may not be willing to pay. Natural gas tells a similar story. While the United States is a major producer, demand is surging, particularly from data centers and AI-driven technologies that require enormous energy consumption. In 2023, data centers accounted for just over 4% of U.S. electricity use. By 2028, that number is expected to triple. Without Canadian gas to stabilize the grid, the U.S. may struggle to keep up. And electricity? More than 30 cross-border transmission lines connect Canadian provinces to American states. Projects like Hydro-Quebec's massive Hertel, New York power line aim to supply 20% of New York City's electricity, a lifeline in an increasingly power-hungry economy. If Ottawa were to pull back even partially, U.S. cities could see prices rise and reliability falter. Which brings us back to Carney's broader strategy: reduce reliance, expand resilience. He isn't proposing a full break from the United States, but he is proposing an end to dependence. For decades, 70% of Canada's exports flowed to one market, the United States. Carney wants that figure reduced to just over half. That won't happen overnight. But it's already reshaping trade policy, infrastructure spending, and the rhetoric of Canadian leadership. Of course, the pivot isn't without its challenges. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, between Canada and the European Union, signed in 2016, remains only partially ratified. 10 EU member states, including Italy, Ireland, and Poland, have yet to approve it. Concerns range from food safety and agricultural sovereignty to corporate influence over dispute resolution mechanisms. Even so, the groundwork is there. CETA eliminates tariffs on nearly all goods crossing the Atlantic. It allows Canadian businesses to bid on government contracts across the EU's 27 member states, and it opens access to a $3.3 trillion market, one that Carney's team sees as a vital pressure release from the US. Asia, too, offers massive potential. Japan, South Korea, and ASEAN countries are eager for energy partners beyond Russia and the Middle East. Canada's proximity, political stability, and environmental safeguards make it an attractive alternative. If Carney can deliver on export capacity, Canadian energy could be flowing eastward in unprecedented volumes within just a few years. This won't be easy. Infrastructure takes time, regulatory hurdles remain, and for now the US is still Canada's largest and most convenient customer. But the mindset is shifting, and in trade, mindset is everything. Trump, for his part, seems unfazed. His messaging remains consistent. If Canada wants to look elsewhere, let them. America will always be the biggest market, and any nation that walks away does so at its own peril. But analysts are warning that complacency could be costly. With inflation still a threat, supply chains already under strain, and energy demands skyrocketing, a rupture in the US-Canada trade relationship could create ripple effects across the American economy. If prices rise, at the pump, in the grocery store, or on the shop floor, political consequences may follow. That's why many see this as a critical inflection point. Carney's win wasn't just about tariffs, it was about trust, or the loss of it. His government reflects a Canadian electorate that no longer believes the US can be counted on to play fair. And in response, they're willing to endure short-term pain for long-term independence. That's the gamble, and it's a big one. In Part 3, we'll look at the possible outcomes. What happens if neither side backs down? Could this trade standoff spiral into a broader economic rift? And is there still a path toward compromise? Or have both leaders already passed the point of no return? The signs are everywhere. Political slogans turning into policies, once reliable partnerships being reevaluated. Behind the carefully worded statements and tariff threats, something deeper is shifting. What was once one of the world's most stable cross-border relationships is now teetering under pressure. And the two men at the center, Donald Trump and Mark Carney, are staring each other down. So what happens if neither side blinks? One possible outcome is a full-scale trade war. Not a rhetorical one, but a measurable, punishing disruption of North America's tightly interwoven economies. If Canada follows through on its proposed $110 billion in retaliatory tariffs, and the US responds in kind, both nations will feel it. The auto sector, already strained, would be one of the first casualties. North American auto production is built on integration. A single car might cross the border 6 times during assembly. Canadian plants supply parts to US factories and vice versa. If border costs rise and supply chains break, delays and price hikes follow. Consumers may find vehicles more expensive, delivery times longer, and model options narrower. For workers in both countries, that could mean reduced shifts or lost jobs. And it's not just cars. Food, construction materials, household goods, everything that travels across the US-Canada border would become subject to new layers of cost and regulation. According to several trade analysts, inflationary pressure in the US could intensify, particularly in regions that rely heavily on Canadian imports. The Midwest, Northeast, and Industrial South would feel the effects first. Canadian producers, meanwhile, would need to move fast to reroute exports, and not every sector would find willing buyers overnight. In short, both sides lose. That's the risk Carney is taking, and the risk Trump may be underestimating. For Carney, the gamble is rooted in long-term resilience. He believes that a hard push now will allow Canada to emerge less dependent and more diversified. For Trump, the logic is rooted in control. He believes tariffs give Washington the leverage it needs to bring foreign partners to heel. And yet, despite the noise, there remains a narrow path toward compromise. The conditions are difficult. Carney would need to secure real concessions, a rollback or freeze on certain tariffs perhaps, or the ability to protect key Canadian industries without penalty. Trump would need to sell the deal to his base as a strategic win, not a retreat. It's a delicate political balancing act for both men, made harder by the fact that neither has shown much appetite for stepping back. Still, the cost of inaction may force the issue. Inflation data in the U.S. continues to show signs of upward movement. Canadian economic forecasts are predicting short-term contraction if the trade barriers persist. A compromise, even a temporary one, could ease both pressures and give negotiators time to craft a more sustainable agreement. But there are deeper currents here. What's playing out between Trump and Carney isn't just about tariffs. It's about trust, identity, and direction. For the United States, this is a test of how far America First policies can stretch before breaking the relationships that once defined its trade leadership. Trump's strategy has redefined U.S. foreign economic policy, but at the cost of alienating allies. Whether it's China, the EU, or now Canada, the message has been the same: conform or pay up. For Canada, this is a moment of self-definition. Carney's administration isn't just reacting, it's actively reshaping the country's global role. By investing in new markets, committing to domestic production, and staking out a more assertive stance, Canada is signaling that it no longer sees its proximity to the U.S. as an automatic advantage. In fact, that proximity now feels like a liability to many voters, and perhaps that's the most consequential shift of all. If Canada succeeds in its diversification strategy, it could become a model for other U.S. trade partners looking to reduce their vulnerability. The EU is already signaling interest in tightening economic ties with Canada. Asian markets are looking to secure stable energy sources amid global uncertainty. If these relationships deepen, the U.S. could find itself increasingly sidelined in global trade alliances it once dominated. That's not an overnight change, but it's a trend with long-term consequences. Energy, again, remains a key piece of the puzzle. Canadian oil and natural gas are central to U.S. supply chains. Carney's government knows this and is using it strategically. If American companies can't rely on Canadian energy the way they used to, they'll face higher costs, tougher logistics, and greater risk. Trump's 10% energy tariff may look manageable on paper, but in practice, it could expose vulnerabilities that haven't been tested in decades. Meanwhile, Canadian producers are already eyeing Asian demand. The LNG terminals under construction will allow shipments to bypass the U.S. entirely. Pipelines are being rerouted. Electricity export deals are being restructured. All of it adds up to one message: Canada is preparing for life after Washington. Inside Canada, Carney's approval numbers remain strong. The public has rallied behind his defiant tone. His message, that economic independence is worth short-term pain, has struck a chord. And with every new announcement of foreign investment, new infrastructure, or tariff revenue spending, that message is reinforced. His position is complex. Domestically, many industries support the tariffs, hoping they'll protect U.S. jobs and level the playing field. But others, particularly exporters and border state manufacturers, are warning that the backlash from Canada could undo those gains. Within Trump's own base, there are signs of division. Some voters are growing wary of rising prices and economic uncertainty. Others remain fiercely loyal to the strategy, believing it's the only way to reclaim America's global leverage. Which side wins out may depend on what happens next. If Trump agrees to a compromise, he risks looking soft on a leader who campaigned against him. If he refuses, he may trigger a deeper economic spiral and hand Carney a long-term political victory. The room for maneuver is tight, and both men know it. As of now, no meeting has been scheduled, no formal talks announced, just two leaders, two visions, and a widening gap. So where does this go? One scenario is escalation. Tariffs rise, trade contracts dissolve, supply chains break, inflation ticks up, markets rattle. That's the short-term reality of a no-deal standoff. Another scenario is strategic delay. Both sides quietly hold the line, avoiding further escalation while assessing economic fallout. That buys time, but it also prolongs uncertainty. The third and most fragile is compromise. A backroom deal, some rollback of tariffs, a public announcement of mutual respect and shared goals. Enough to cool tensions, not enough to rewrite the rules. Whichever way it goes, the message is clear. The old US-Canada trade relationship is gone. What replaces it, if anything, is still being written. But Carney's Canada is done playing the polite neighbor, and Trump's America is doubling down on pressure. In the middle stands a border that has rarely felt so political. As the months unfold, one thing is certain. North America's next economic chapter won't look like the last. What we're witnessing isn't just a political disagreement, it's a turning point. Mark Carney's rise signals a new chapter in Canada's identity. Confident, assertive, and unwilling to be pushed into submission, even by its most powerful neighbor. And for Donald Trump, it's another test of his America First doctrine. Can aggressive trade pressure force compliance, or does it isolate the United States from its closest allies? The choices both leaders make in the coming weeks will have real-world consequences, not just for economies and governments, but for families, workers, and businesses on both sides of the border. From auto factories in Ontario to energy pipelines in Texas, from grocery prices in Quebec to power grids in New York, this isn't abstract policy. It's daily life. And perhaps most importantly, this standoff is exposing something deeper. The fragile trust that once held this trade relationship together is breaking. Whether that trust can be rebuilt or whether this rupture becomes permanent remains to be seen. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think Carney is making the right move by standing up to Trump's tariffs? Or is Canada risking too much in trying to go its own way? Is Trump defending United States interests or pushing away valuable allies? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. If this report helped you understand the bigger picture, please support our work by liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing to the channel so you stay updated on the latest developments. We break down global stories with clarity, depth, and truth, because your understanding matters. Thanks for watching.